Hello and welcome to the Bluefish Astrology YouTube channel. I'm Lily Walker, and today I'm here to talk a little bit about Losar, the symbolism of the fire horse, and the astrology of 2026. Losar, or the Tibetan Lunar New Year, is technically on Wednesday, February 18th, which corresponds this year with Ash Wednesday. However, we know that the beginning of the Losar moment begins with the new moon at 28 degrees Aquarius that happens on Tuesday, February 17th. Now, this is a north node solar eclipse, and it's ruled by Saturn. And Venus is also conjunct the north node, which is important. And we know that Saturn has newly ingressed into Aries, where he is at fall, and is imminently approaching a conjunction with Neptune, which is a major outer planet transit. So we know that the year of the fire horse kicks off with a bang. And I will get into talking about some of those things as we progress further into the video. However, I wanted to kind of start by just talking about what is Losar and what is this celebration about. And the Lunar New Year happens the cross quarter day in Aquarius. So we have typically in religious systems, there are 8 major holidays that occur on the cross days, like the cardinal cross days of winter solstice, summer solstice, fall and spring equinox. But then there are also holidays that happen on the cross quarters or the fixed cross, which is interesting because that cross corresponds in symbolism to more esoteric studies where you see like Ezekiel and him seeing the wheels with the lion, the eagle, the ox, and the child, right? So that symbolism is of the fixed cross, which are the cross quarter days. And the cross quarter day in Aquarius relates to the child and is about the new pour of the new code coming in for the new year. So the date of Losar moves like Easter, and it's related to moon cycles, and the moon cycles related to the spring equinox, which is like Easter, right? And sometimes you'll see the date of Chinese New Year and Tibetan Lunar New Year be different, right? So I typically always follow the Tibetan calculation for that, but this year the two are the same. So in Aquarius is also like this cross quarter day in pagan cultures is considered to be a holiday called Imbolc. And at this time in the growing cycle of the wheel of the year, it's where the seed that was planted and begins to, take root at the winter solstice has like its root structures rhizoming and spanning out and beginning to make connections. But we also see the first bud of the knobby bud on the head of the plant beginning to form, right? And this is in the Tibetan system, it's understood that Losar happens in the birth canal of the year. And so it's like that space between the death of the old year and the birth of the new year. And so practices around this time relate to cleaning and sweeping out the debris and the dust and sediment from the previous year and making way for the new. And we call upon Vajrakhilaya in our practices, who's a wrathful deity and manifestation of the guru, who will protect us. And we call upon a fierceness within ourselves to clean out and move away and be ready for the new. I saw on Lama Sultram's, one of her social media platforms, one of the practitioners talking about how this period is actually called the dawn period, the 10 days before Losar, and how it can be very heavy energy and depressive. And that's because we're being called with fierceness to clean out the old and make way for the new. And that does require sometimes a little bit of fierceness in order to kind of have the toothiness to be able to let go and trust, have primal trust that the new is coming in. In this Aquarian moment and in Aquarius in general is an air sign, and it relates to making connections and connecting the dots, making those mental connections. Aquarius energy is often very brilliant, very unorthodox, rebellious, and avant-garde, like ahead of its curve, and outsider energy. So away from the mainstream. And it typically tends to be a bit ahead of the curve, right? So that's why it's ahead of the mainstream energy. And so, but in this time of Aquarius is a lot about connecting neural networks and connecting the dots. And so in this time, we begin to, the points of light begin to connect and the neural networks begin to expand, connected to who we will be working with and ideas and matrices and things that we'll be engaged in the coming year. So we're beginning to make those connections at the Losar time. And it's also like on trees, how you see at Imbolc, the knobby buds of the leaves start to pop out on the trees. And they'll be like little clusters, like little balls almost, but they're not the full network connected into the unified arbol of the roundedness of the tree. They're just there in potential. So this idea coming around Losar and in Aquarius in general. So the new code for the new year is set in Aquarius. And like I said, we rely on practices of Vajrakhilaya. And I put the mantra for Vajrakhilaya here, and also thorough cleaning. And then when Losar comes, on Losar, we rely on Vajrasattva practices, which are like the immediate or manifestation, like spontaneous manifestation of the Pure Land. Vajrasattva purifies karma, and our true nature and our bodhicitta can like pop out like a fish, out of the water, just like a rainbow fish popping out of the water, just like that, with confidence. And so this is the Vajrasattva practices that we do on Losar to, set aspirations for purifying our karma and obscurations, but also for manifesting the Pure Land in the new coming year. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the symbolism of the fire horse. Now, this is non-traditional. It's coming just from myself and things I pulled together. But a lot of it I got from Charles Kovacs, who of things I'm going to talk about in this section of the presentation. And Charles Kovacs was a teacher of Waldorf teachers, and he wrote a lot of books. And he wrote this book, and this is the one we're going to be taking it from. And I'm not going to I hesitate to read that it's called The Apocalypse in Rudolf Steiner's lecture series, but that's not because I think there's a coming apocalypse. It's more because of the nature of the fire horse. And so fire is the element that will be qualifying or tempering the horse symbolism. So let's talk about that first, right? So fire is a hot and dry energy. So in temperament. So what that means is that if it's hot, it means that it's quick moving, fast, and that it's expansive, outwardly directing, advancing, and it spreads and it plumes and it creates like a very courageous sort of outwardly focused energy. And it also is dry in that it's separating and individuating, and it's more self-focused and individualized and independent energy. Like you think about if you had a hunk of dirt and it was all wet with water, which is connective, the opposite of dry, right? That if you were to blow hot air on it, it separates into fine grains of sand that are all separated. And then also the idea of something becoming so dry that it becomes brittle and breaks, which I would say is kind of on point for this year as well, with Saturn moving into Aries. So fire is also known to be shape-shifting. Like in the French, it's on the French coat of arms, the chameleon or the lizard. Shape-shifting and also transformative, right? And so the French king, the story goes that he looked down and saw a lizard who was regrowing a tail and decided that that would be a good emblem for their coat of arms, this transformation kind of thing. But we also know that the French throne has been connected to the sun and the sun king and sort of that fire energy for a while. So in the esoteric sense, or at least in the Tibetan, mandalas, fire represents the western corner of the Padma Dakini, and and she's red in color, and that represents desire, and it's the wisdom of discriminating wisdom. So the idea is that the poisons of desire and craving and lust and attachment need to be clarified or purified into pure luminosity or pure desire, and that we do this by way of discriminating wisdom. And I'm going to read this quote from Rigpa Wiki in order to define what discriminating wisdom is, or the wisdom of discernment. But the idea I wanted to share, that if you ever needed to look up anything about Tibetan culture or terms and Tibetan Buddhism, that Rigpa Wiki is a really great resource for that, and has been forever. Okay, so for a very long time. So that's what I always use. But the wisdom of discernment is one of the 5 wisdoms. So there's a wisdom connected with each of the elements, and the 5 points of the mandala. Space is the central one. And that from the point of view, so it's saying that while from the point of view of the absolute nature, all phenomena are the same in being equal, from the point of view of the phenomena themselves, all things in samsara are distinct and not confounded. And in my understanding and in my practice, the idea is that the wisdom of discernment lets us know that there are things that are higher and lower that we might be desiring and magnetizing towards us. And that ultimately, that the pure desire for liberation and for like our agape, for the guru and for the light of the sun, like the sunshine, that pure sunshine that manifests the pure realm, that having a desire towards that, like wholesome desire towards that, and magnetizing that, as opposed to some fleshy or material desire or craving or things that we're attached to. And to further illustrate that is this story I'm bringing forward, this story that Charles Kovacs tells, where he creates a dichotomy or juxtaposition between the character of Mary Magdalene and the Whore of Babylon. And he says that Mary Magdalene, that Jesus says in Luke 7:47, that her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. So what lived in the desires that made her a prostitute, and what was awakened and redeemed by Christ, was the power of love. But it's the same with all of our desires. All desiring is loving something. Through Lucifer, this element of love has been reduced to a lower level. Through him, the love element is hidden in desires that were in their rightful place in the ancient moon, like in animal, beastly desires. As far as we're capable of freeing love from the spell of Luciferic forces, we awaken in us this sleeping beauty that is the manas of the spirit self. Selfless love is the magic that breaks the spell of Lucifer. And the Greek word St. Paul used for love, agape, does not mean charity. It means love that is free from desire. So it means that we are loving something that we are not necessarily able to grab and hold and taste and consummate and relate with in our physical body, but loving something, like it's like a higher love that's free from attachment and ownership. It's like letting the bird fly free instead of keeping it caged, or let your love fly free if it comes back to you, that sort of thing. But even if it doesn't come back to you, still loving it. And, it's like, even if things are seemingly arising not so great for us, that it's arising for the benefit of beings. And that love flying free brings its love to beings into the world. Where the difference between the Whore of Babylon was that prostitution began as a religious practice in cults that were dedicated to Venus, and that it was more of a sensual, animal, beastly sort of thing. These were in these sort of cults, in these Roman cults to Venus. And he goes on to illustrate that story. And I love these pictures, especially because the first time I ever saw David Bowie's chart, it was in a astrology class at Kepler, and I was reading it and whatever, and I immediately saw like the past life like I was like, oh my gosh, his past life, like Jonathan Edwards, and then this life he's coming as David Bowie to kind of rectify that huge imprint of virtue signaling that Jonathan Edwards put out there in the lexicon of thought. And then David Bowie comes to kind of like, what's the word? Neutralize. So David Bowie comes to like neutralize that effect, like what he puts out there, the two of them kind of cancel each other out. And so anyway, so I chose, but I'm not trying to say that David Bowie is Tannhauser or whatever, but I just like the pictures and they matched in color. But in this story that Charles Kovacs tells, he tells about a troubadour who goes on a voyage, and he finds the entrance to the cave of Venus, and he spends this time in this love lair of Venus writing these songs and poems and things like this. And then he finds there's a contest, like a troubadour contest, and he goes to sing his songs, but he can only sing, like, these songs are all about physical, sensual love, and he doesn't know any other songs. But there's another contestant there whose songs praised the love, whose symbol was the Holy Grail. And so he's pointing to like Orpheus, like Orphic music as the comparison. So there's this secular music that's about my milkshake brings all the boys to the yard, versus like a song from that's like of an Orphic nature, something like Modest Yahoo, you're a king without a crown. Don't you know it's time to come home? That kind of thing. And so, we can see this a lot, even in secular culture, like today, like I always apply this kind of hermeneutic to art in all forms. And there are some forms of art that are multivalent, and it may seem like it's just a simple love song, but when you think about it, it's every love song ever was written to God. But, and it applies along those lines, like the Persian or Rumi's poetry, that sort of thing. But then you look at other songs, like maybe on 98 The Bull or whatever, and I got my ass in the sand and a margarita in my hand, and there's really not much there, that you can figure out how to have any other meaning other than just indolence in that, or a moment of rest. And so but then what I also think is interesting is that some artists that you would think are just secular artists that really aren't saying very much, and even if the poetry's not all that multivalent, like it doesn't have a lot of layers, there's still that edge, like Taylor Swift, who is one artist who I think still manages to pull it off, even though she has a lot of Capricorn that keeps her metaphors very concrete. That she's got a wittiness to her that she's still able to pull off some multivalence to her lyrics to be a true artist. So that's, one story is the idea of this celebrating a love that's, in this way with art, that it was very Venusian and magnetizing energy, but in doing so, that's only physical or sensual, versus that which is about the Grail quest, right? Like the quest for divine reunion with the divine. And so the question is, though, like, how do we transform this astral body of ours, which astrality has to do with emotions and triggers and beastly influence, like our animal nature, our astrality. And how do we transform that into the manas, or the spirit self of like the pure sunshine, or like the alchemical gold of our soul? And he brings up the story of Parsifal, which is really interesting because he talks about how Parsifal is a renunciate and an ascetic, but that he has this kind of like divine flight, and he's able, like a night ascent kind of thing. And he's able in this dream to see his etheric body. And that's like our plant self, and it grows like with the sun. Like I often talk about the etheric body in connection to solar eclipses as opposed to lunar eclipses, which would be more astrality. And but the solar right ascension sort of vibe is our etheric body. And he sees his etheric body, and what he sees is a lily, which is really beautiful. But as he begins to look at it and take stock of this, what he's seeing, he notices that there's this horrible stench coming from this lily, and he doesn't understand why or what it is. But what it is like the dead bodies of his astrality all around him, because he's pushed the astrality out, but he hasn't done anything with it. that he pushed the passions and desires out, but they still exist. They're still there all around him in his mandala. It's like he's spiritually bypassed them or disassociated instead of integrating them by transforming them. So there's this juxtaposition of the lily and the rose in the Rosicrucian system, which is that because in the Rosicrucian path and also in Tantra and Vajrayana, there's not the rejection of desires, but the transformation of them. So man is not meant to rid himself of desires, but to redeem the forces in them. So it's what we desire, you know? And so that's where discriminating wisdom comes in, so that we know that although everything, in the absolute sense, everything has bodhicitta, pure bodhicitta, in the relative sense, it does not yet. You know, it's like we're in temporal time, and not everything, there is a hierarchy of sorts, and to desire things that are of the higher hierarchy and higher love, and things that will magnetize things to us, that will lift us up to that, instead of drag us into the, you know, samsaric chaos of beastie, teeth out fighting over things that we desire and are attached to and want. And so it talks about in this book also how the black cross, or that's the cardinal cross of the cardinal directions, and you'll see like the hangman hung on that cross, or Odin hung himself from a tree upside down, that sort of thing. So this black cross, that the rose, that represents our desire, and that the roses grow from the cross, so that we have blooms and beautiful fragrant roses of beauty, like pristine beauty, growing of our gifts and talents that grow out from the cross of our desires, and how we work with them. And so then the symbolism of the horse. So the first thing I think of when I think of the horse and symbolism is Sagittarius. And because Sagittarius is a horse, and half horse, half human. And we know also that like the teacher of the horse, those kind of, I can't remember the word right now, but the teacher of the horse people is Chiron, right? He's one of these, isn't he? And that, so it's a lot about higher philosophy, what we believe, how we make meaning in the world, ruled by Jupiter, right? So Sagittarius is a fire sign, but it's mutable fire, and so it's more like the glimmers of hope and things like this that get us through the darkest nights. It's not like a blazing, aggressive fire. It's more like this, the glimmers and a very soft, effulgent kind of glow. And Sagittarius, the symbol for Sagittarius you'll often see is a bow and arrow. So the idea is we're in Gemini, we have like dueling banjos, two different ideas, and elementary learning and volleying back and forth, and you know, changing our mind and learning and reaccommodating and reorganizing the learning schema and things like this. In Gemini, it's elementary learning and communication. In Sagittarius, we have higher philosophy and the take-home meaning. So we've triangulated between the dueling banjos into one solid melody or note, and we take aim at a target or a learning target and loose our arrow towards that target. So we're, you know, it's like the triangulating between the 2 points of duality. And so that reminds me of a song that my son's father wrote that says, "Feather the arrow of your mind and let it fly into the heart of an empty sky." So that's very Buddhist in nature, but I love that image of feather the arrow of your mind and let it fly. That's so Sagittarius, right? And in the absolute sense, that the empty sky. Yeah. So, but as mentioned, Sagittarius is mutable fire and very soft and optimistic and hopeful, and we're like philanthropy and this sort of thing happening in Sagittarius. And Alice Bailey calls it the lower gate, that we're going to go to ascend to this hill of the Capricorn moment of the winter solstice, and raising the optimism and the belief in the good of the world and in what it is that we've come to do here, and the hope that even though things don't work out, we can understand a higher meaning as to why, and we can walk through this little gate and approach the moment of the, you know, rekindling of our light with God, so that we can come in service, like even if we're not getting what we want, that we show up for the world, that sort of thing, because samsara is inherently disappointing. We're not going to be getting what we want, really, right? And so unless what we want is liberation. And so like just mustering the hope to take an optimism and take an overall meaning or arc of meaning of life in order to continue to take incarnation on that wheel in order to show up to help others and other beings. So I think about the horse in that way. Another way I think about the horse is like the heart horse. And I love this picture because I'm not really that into horses, but I've become more so as my son has gotten older, and he is really into horses, and we have a horse. And so I like this picture because it's so true, but it's common knowledge. This is coming from like an equestrian, not Charles Kovacs or some Waldorf weirdo. This is like straight from like an equestrian website that's talking about like the human's heart electromagnetic field and that of the horse, which is much huger. And that if you go spend time around horses, that you feel very, very seen, heard, and touched without having to talk, be seen or touch, that you feel understood and held. And because horses balance our electromagnetic frequency, their electromagnetic frequency is so strong that it balances ours. And I have this joke about the barn because there's this very sweet horse named Jay, and I call it going to get the full J, because I can't afford to go to a spa. I've never been to a spa. I can't get my nails done, that sort of thing. Like I don't have these pampering kind of things available to me, but something that's available to me for free is Jay. And Jay is so sweet, and he'll come. He's a big racehorse, and he's actually won money and stuff, but now he's got adopted by somebody who doesn't do that, and he's retired. But Jay will come and he'll put his little muzzle here on one side, and he'll chew on your hair and get his food all over your face. And then he'll bring it around and come right to the top to your third eye, and his little warm breath on your third eye. And then he comes down to the other side and nuzzles the other ear and the other side of your hair. And so he's like done like a full arc around your head. And it's like an amazing sweetness. And I call it going to get the full J. And it's funny because you walk out with like hay sticking out of your hair and like dirt all over your face. It's like not glorious pampering, but yet it's very earthy pampering and works really well. But the story that Charles Kovacs tells about this is about, their ideas that as we progress through the epochs of consciousness, which relate to the precession of equinox, which is not something I'm going to get into right now, but as we progress through the epochs of consciousness, not only our consciousness and the like kind of objective of what it is we were trying to learn, and like a learning objective of this stage of consciousness, not only did that shift, but also the physical landscape of the cosmos and of our bodies and the inhabitants of the cosmos changed, right? So as there were changes in consciousness, there were changes in body. And so back in the phase of epoch of Cancer, which corresponds to the time of the culture of ancient India and like the time of the 7 rishis and Manu and these kind of stories, that we experienced in our consciousness like a sense of atavistic clairvoyance is what they call it. And this, so that means we were clairvoyant and we were all kind of in the same psychic stew, and that we could talk without talking, see without seeing, and touch without touching, right? Like we were in this atavistic clairvoyance. And then, but slowly that began to retract because, as we retracted inward to create the subject-object divide of self and other, like an inside world and an outside world. And there's like a hard line, like a hard stop in between. And as this organ of clairvoyance drew within us like this antenna and became inside of our body, that corresponds to the dawning of rational intelligence. Okay, so the horse course. Oh, I didn't get to the horse part yet. And so in the and as we did this with that sort of astrality, clairvoyance, we have other forms of astrality. And as we drew those inward into our body as well, these became different animals. They took shape in a different form, and we see them now in the objective outside world as animals. And so, this is interesting with regard to spirit totems and spirit cards and like divination by way of like landscape. Like if you see a deer run towards the western corner, or if you see a heron fly or an eagle, or, whatever, a raccoon run, or this sort of thing, and the different symbols of astrality that we connect with those animals. Okay, so there's a way to understand astrality and what it is. So that's really interesting. Well, when we pulled in clairvoyance or alternative ways of knowing, right, besides just rational empirical intelligence, then that became the horse. That clairvoyance or full-bodied knowing became, we can see that in the form of the horse. And so, and Rudolf Steiner talks about how people who can see auras can still see the auras and the astrality around the forehead and head of the horse. And if you know anything about horses or have spent time with them, they bump their forehead where they have that little forelock of hair up against you, and they want to be scratched right there, in that area. And they just love that. And they also bump heads and together if they like each other right there. So that place on the horse is like a hot spot too. But Rudolf Steiner, the idea is that people who could see the auras, they could see it outside of the horse, which is where we began to get stories and myths and legends about the unicorn. And so, so the point here, though, is that the horse corresponds to intelligence and to our mind and what we know and how we know it. And so the idea of the unicorn, though, is that a unicorn is known to be very fierce, but the story goes, if a unicorn in the forest, if it runs into a pure virgin, that it will approach her and lay down and let it pet her and, lay its head in her lap and let her pet and stroke the horse and befriend her. And that virgin corresponds to divine Sophia, or divine wisdom, which is a more full-bodied knowing, not just rational intelligence, not just emotional intelligence, but sort of an integration of the whole enchilada, right, of wisdom. And so that is what the horse represents. And so also, though, he brings up the difference between the horse and the unicorn and the lion, which you'll see sometimes as sigils on different coats of arms and things, and that the lion represents faith, because religious faith springs from the heart. So there's this faith and primal trust, and also this full-bodied knowing, that are the kind of the two wings. And, you can kind of see that in the two wings metaphor of Buddhism as well, that wisdom flies on two wings. And another and final symbol I'm going to talk about the horse is the wind horse, which is a symbol you'll hear talked about a lot in Buddhism. And again, from Rigpa Wiki, that the wind horse is a mythical creature that our inner airs, or our psychic winds, use to travel through the body or through the world. So there's this wind horse that all 5 of the psychic powers and wisdoms are kind of traveling in and on. And from Namkhai Norbu, this is printed on Rigpa Wiki, which is why I say it's the best source, because it has commentary also from various Buddhist teachers. And Namkhai Norbu was one of Lama Tsultrim Malone's teachers and is very celebrated in that way. And he says that the first syllable is long, which represents the element of space, but the second syllable is ta, the excellent horse. So having to do with the space element, which is where every, like, source realm, almost, where everything, it's pregnant with divine potential and everything springs out from that. And as we interact with phenomena, the different lights come in and produce the phenomena. And so the purity of that wind horse corresponds to the purity of the arising in that way. And we know that mindfulness practices are often related to following the breath, and that there's this connection between thoughts and breath that's well established in different forms of yogic or meditative practice. And so, maybe something about purifying our thoughts, right? And so, so my takeaway from this, however, is that the symbol of the horse relates to intelligence and to the cultivation of clear sight and alternative ways of knowing and navigating that are rooted in the heart, like a full-bodied knowing. And that the element of fire will temper this energy with the qualities of the Padma Dakini for better or for worse. Okay, so clarifying and refining our desire and powers of magnetism by way of discriminating wisdom that will have us coming from agape or higher love, or love that's free from desire, or not, right? So it's a fire horse, regardless of whether or not you're like fully in on it. And so like what we desire and what we're magnetizing, what we lust and crave after, will be tempering our thoughts and what we're running towards this year, and how that what we're thinking is producing the phenomena around us. So this idea of clarifying our desires and what we're magnetizing towards us, is important in this fire horse year. And the year of the fire horse is about cultivating discriminating wisdom with regard to our passion, art, joy, intelligence, joy, and the things we love, and using our intelligence and mindfulness and inner ways of knowing, our heart sense, to run towards and connect and communicate with new lovers and a quest to reignite the spark of joy. And when I say lovers, I mean like Rumi says, to fall in love. My professor of Persian poetry taught me to fall in love at least once every day with something, like, what did you fall in love with today? And so it's love that's free from desire, right? It's free from attaching or grabbing or tasting or consummating. It's like, no, I just love that. It's beautiful. I celebrate it. I give it light. I give it love. I give it air a bounce of buoyancy to let it fly, help it fly even further, right? To bring its music or wisdoms to beings, right? Not just for me. And so, so that's like kind of what the year of the fire horse is about. And we know that there is a ton of air and fire this year. And so like the horse being the intelligence and the ways we're thinking, communicating, writing, telling stories, like using our intelligence and our words, and this sort of thing, the way we think about things. And that's, really interesting, because we know that that Jupiter and Saturn made a conjunction in 2020 and kind of decimated the worldview. So, now we're kind of using that Jupiterian intelligence in order to kind of run forward on a new track, in a new cycle, in a new kind of stretch, that a brand new kind of world, which we'll get on to when we talk about Saturn. So I do want to talk a little bit about the astrology of 2026. I'm actually not going to go into a ton of detail. If you want to go back and look at these slides later, they're mostly just to give you something to look at, because I'm kind of boring. But there are some main points that I want to share about the astrology this year, and it largely has to do with the sign of Leo and self-aggrandizement and overconfidence too early in the game. So the thing about the fire horse is it needs to measure its gait. Fire is hot, quick, fast. It runs, it spreads, and it takes off. But is it really thinking about where it's heading? Is it really thinking about like skillfulness, right? Like, and more scorpionic sort of, kind of holding your cards for a minute before you, kind of those kind of plays where you kind of think and hold back and kind of maneuver. That's not a fire horse. Like that's not, and it's not in the signature of the planets for this year either. Although we do have Jupiter in Cancer for the first part of it, we really don't have a lot of water or air this year. We have a lot of water or earth. We have a lot of air and fire. And so it can move really quick. And so my advice, especially after looking and surveying the astrology, which you guys probably have stacks of notes already too, and all your calendars made, and you've been looking at this for quite a while. It's already February, right? But my main takeaway from this is just to be very, very careful with the Leo house in your chart, and with your look at me sort of swagger and shine and confidence, because both Aries and Leo are fire signs. They're going to be pumping that up, right? but it's like a hot air balloon that gets pumped up so high, and then it starts to lose sight of the ground. And then when these transits come and fall towards the end of the year, and the bridge that takes us into the next year, that balloon can get shot down. And so, and we'll get on to looking at some of that a little bit, of where those transits come in, and kind of talk about it a little bit more. But that's really the main thing that I wanted to say about this year, is that rather than like shooting from the hip and like running towards it, that more whatever we can do to pause and reflect is time well spent, right? Because that energy is hard for us to tap into. Saturn and Aries in general, like Saturn wants to go slow and be mindful and do the job once, right? But Aries doesn't really allow for that. That's, we'll get on to talking about how it's building the bridge on the fly as we go. And we have to build in order, or we're going to fall into the fire pit, the chasm in between worlds, old world, new world. And so, we have to make these moves, but the more we can take time to pause, think, and reflect in connection to others and that sort of thing, that time will serve us well. And so I'm going to say for now, also, just in case people just stop watching, I also just wanted to say that the best use of the South Node in Leo would be to let go of limitations to our shine, things that are blocking our ability to feel self-confident and share and roar. And that rather than coming at this year from a space of just roar, and then as you get towards the end, all the squares and things that start to happen that like kind of check that roar, rather than leading from like a overconfidence and then being like, oh, I'm being checked on that, and then falling down. It's more like start out with, I'm going to let go of things that are blocking my ability to shine purely, like the pure light of Apollo, or, the sunlight, or the Guru Padmasambhava, that sunlight creates the Pure Land, right? So I'm letting go of things that are blocking or even staining my heart shine by personality and things like that. So letting go of those things and working with the South Node as a way and those transits as a way to clear out blockages to shining forward the Pure Land, right? Okay, so, but we will get in, I'm going to go through a little bit about each of the planets. So starting with Pluto in Aquarius. And so Pluto is fully in Aquarius this year. And Pluto is obsession, it's transformation, it's the power, like the volcanic power of transformation. And so probably the best metaphor for this is the one Peter Kingsley talks about the volcano and jumping in that volcano of transformation. And so into the hellfires of the underworld to burn off these personality badges and things like that occlude our true character from shining forward. And so, but Pluto is very atomic. It's also very volcanic, and it's obsessive, and it's about power. It has like this obsession for power because, a volcano is very powerful, right? And so, but it'll often show in more unenlightened forms as power plays and manipulations of power and things like that. But I think one really healthy way to think about Pluto in Aquarius is an obsession to rhizome the reed flutes. And that's a poem that Rumi wrote about the reed flute and how it cries from being cut from the bed of unity, right? And so rhizoming the reed flutes are the different notes of song that are equally obsessed with that, making that return to unity or reuniting with the beloved. And, I say this because we'll get on to Saturn has been through quite a journey since 2020, but there've been a lot of endings and endings of old cycles and relationships and structures and things like that ended in 2020. And we've been watching them slowly, fully disintegrate. And then, moving into Saturn and Aries, where it's taking the first step, like the fool off the cliff, into this new world where Saturn's just a baby, which is weird for Saturn because Saturn's an old man that carries a lot of authority. But in Aries, he doesn't have anything he needs, or in order to pull that off, but he still will be his old begrudging, curmudgeon of a self. But Saturn's very new, right? So, but the idea here is that Saturn rules Aquarius. And so our connections and the ways that the dots were connected, and we were connected to each other with regard to communications and air element sort of things, those things were destroyed and those connections have been broken. So we really do need to create new neural networks. And that Pluto in Aquarius sort of represents an obsession to connect, or to rhizome the reed flutes and connect with like-minded collectives of like art collectives or astrology collectives, or, groups of people who are on the same page, and kind of connect with those people in order to harness the collective power together. And we'll also see a lot of dichotomy between individual and collective with the oppositions between Pluto and Leo. Okay. And I think that comes up with Uranus and Gemini as well, with the rights of the individual versus the rights of the collective. So that's Pluto in Aquarius, and different aspects will be making square or opposition to Aquarius, so as Pluto holds space there and holds camp in Aquarius, that obsession to connect and forge new connections will be being hit. In addition, one other, Pluto can be monsters, and you see whatever monster kind of starts to show up. And one monster of Pluto in Aquarius would be the data harvesters and the tech oligarchs who are like harvesting all of our data and like getting masterminding control of that information. And with the trine to Uranus, it will be just like, it's like hand in glove. It's just being given to them. So Pluto trine Uranus is a beautiful thing, and we each individually can use it to our advantage. However, in this one correspondence of the tech data harvesters and data centers and stuff, that's going to be just like hand in glove. I mean, I'm like, why did I have two different Wi-Fi companies come install towers right in front of my house and every house on my block recently? Because they need that to spy on me, right? It's like hand in glove. It's just happening. The whole Peter Thiel kind of world of that new sort of system that's coming in with regard to technology and monitoring individuals and monitoring the collective and keeping tabs on and all the way they're all connected, right? So that's one monster, or kind of darker shade of Pluto in Aquarius. But like I said, it could be used positively by each of us by connecting to those who have us who are singing the same note or have a note that's in harmony with ours. And so we make like a nice wah together, like we want to try to create those connections. And so Uranus and Gemini, Uranus is going into Gemini this year. He enters into Gemini in April. Uranus did do a short preview into Gemini, and I felt like that was a hot mic, because it's communications. Gemini is ruled by Mercury, but Uranus so it's coming into Gemini. So when it did come into Gemini, it felt like a really hot mic, like that communication, what the wires of communication were tapped and they were hot. That mic was hot. And, that's people spying on us for one, it can make us feel that way, but also just the way that the social media and everyone's worldwide connected now, and how hot that mic can be. But Uranus typically represents chaos and upheavals and disruptions. It's like lightning strike. Uranus's aim is to up level the collective. So it brings in these disruptive lightning flashes that just like of electricity that like fry you a little bit, but its aim is to up level. Okay. So in Taurus, we noticed that Uranus in Taurus, which has been in there for a few years now. I can't remember exactly when it went in to tell you the truth right now, but Uranus in Taurus represented like a disruption of the bell of the earth, like the good of the garden, the Taurus field. And so that's like the lower garden where everything good and beautiful on the earth grows in Taurus, and we storehouse our wealth, and we have things like of corn and wheat and we have like stockpiles of food, and we have, the things that we need to support a good life, right? Well, our definition of the good life. And that Uranus being in there was a real disruptor. It's ruled by Venus, so it can also have to do with money and what we find beautiful, and just these things really changing. But some things that we saw come in during this time were the pandemic, which really shook up the organization of the world and the good life in the garden, right? We see soaring grocery prices and food shortages. Bitcoin had some interesting movements. It became a thing. It fell off from being a thing. People got in trouble for what they did with Bitcoin. There's something called stable coin now as we're coming towards the end of this transit. So this sort of thing. So related to money and up leveling or changing the way that we use money. And then we also saw some interesting things like MAGA's embrace of natural products. So, coming from rural communities, I happen to know that nobody cared if deodorant had aluminum in it before Uranus and Taurus. But suddenly then once it did, like I saw my friends from rural places posting things about chemicals in hair shampoo and makeup and deodorant and things like this, and food. And we saw RFK's Maha movement become a thing with the rural people. Like, who would have thought that the rural people were going to embrace RFK? I didn't think that. I like him, but I don't know where he's at right now, because I think he's anyway. But that's one thing that we saw, though, is that sort of whole Maha thing, and was Uranus and Taurus up leveling how people relate to the commodities of Earth and what we value and like. And do we value Doritos with that stinky orange cheese, or would we like a more natural version that's good for our bodies and Earth, building up the Earth? Other things we saw were like Trump on social media discussing his vanities. Like, that was shocking, right? We're not used to that sort of thing. Raging fires. In Texas, a couple, or at least once, 10,000 cattle died, but I think cattle died 2 different times, like a lot of cattle in tandem with transits to Uranus and Taurus. We also saw genocide in Palestine, which was shocking, right? And the whole ICE situation is a bit shocking, like how all that's going on. And with regard to just the situation in the garden, right? And how we can enjoy life. And there are some shocking things going on. But one thing that was really positive that happened was that at one point that the Northern Lights became visible to most of the world, or at least to most of the United States. And that's something that never happens and happened. And so the sun flares were related to that. But nonetheless, it produced this beautiful phenomena of the Northern Lights visible to everyone. And that was something not expected and really rare. Now, Uranus moving into Gemini will start to disrupt the communications wires and our learning and what elementary facts and what's, we always thought that was true, but nope, it's going to flip on a dime, and that's true. It's chatter, shocking amounts of disruptive, chaotic chatter, and infighting, well, maybe not infighting, fighting between, this is my side, this is your side, the two sides of the coin, fighting, and just disruption and chatter, and Mercury can be trickster like and not always a good guy. And so that wittiness that's like can be not nice, right? Always, it's not seeking to create connection, it's just seeking to win. So Uranus and Taurus and Gemini will bring up levels and shocks to our communication wires, right? And also to our elementary learning systems. One thing that could be really great about this is potentially more online learning, which is more equitable to larger swaths of the population, especially college, which has become was really honestly out of reach for me, which is why I still have $100,000 debt, right? So college has become really inequitable and unattainable for huge portions of the population. And, but creating the more online systems of learning and certificate programs and things like that are out there, the more accessible that is to wider population. And so the trine to Pluto there, you can see sort of that positive influence of that, because Pluto in Aquarius is all about the collective. So, creating a more equitable situation, learning situations. Even if we don't love them necessarily. People don't love online learning, especially if you were in the privileged class that could go in person. But for people like me who could never go in person, it's great that I can at least go online. True, it tastes like ashes, and I wish I could be there in person, but at least I can learn the stuff. At least I can do it myself. At least I can DIY and build my own and be part and get the good instruction to do it, and that sort of thing. So honestly, online learning and the opening of those sort of forums have been really helpful to me, although I too would rather go in person. But that's not an option. So at least I have this other option. So notable historical periods with Uranus and Gemini include the American Revolutionary War, and also humanism. It came in around this time, and that was like the idea of basic rights, basic human inalienable rights, that because we're humans. And but really, if you think deeper about it, it's the difference between divine right versus individual rights. Okay. So around this time of the Renaissance, we began there began to be like an assertion that the individuals could read the Bible, right? Like for one, like we could do this ourselves. But at the same time, there's like the reason why is because the divine right, the people that were in charge of divine right had become so corrupt, like the Saturnian corruption of them being just like wedged in there and like a rock and idol for like a cast idol, like something that's immovable, and the rigidity in words and teachings and things like that, like the literal readings of things and other different ways where the people that were stewards of divine right had become so corrupt that it wasn't divine right anymore. And so it was better to assert the rights of individuals to fight back for that, because the individuals were actually representing divine right, and more purely than the divine right was at that time. It's like I talk about Giordano Bruno and how he bust open the dome, and how you can't, and to Copernicanism kind of idea, and how you can't really blame Giordano Bruno though, because he was trapped in a cosmos, in a universe where he was a slave to the Pope. Like he couldn't assert anything of what his heart, what his daemon in his heart and his different, like, if he had things ear whispered to him, oh, this is the truth of it. There was no space for that, because there were corrupt limits holding that down. And so, he couldn't, so he bust open that dome, and that was so positive in that respect. But at the same time, in this period, when Uranus is coming in Gemini again, then we may be thinking about some of these things in a different light. And for instance, like those ideas of divine right versus human individual rights, because, humanism is actually a bad word, according to me, even though much of the things that came out with humanism created America, where we could have a free religion was free, and we had rights as an individual, right? So we weren't under this corrupt divine right of the Vatican or whatever it was Henry VIII, was doing, and the Cavaliers over there. Like it was more along those lines, though, what we did. But the idea was, because it certainly wasn't John Knox Protestantism, but like it's the idea that the individual has a right to seek truth and freedom and meaning for themselves, right? Basically. And that's really great. But unfortunately, humanism also has some other things which it denies divine, right? Because it denies the divine. And so as we get to this point with Uranus and Gemini making trine to Pluto in Aquarius, it's like, and with all those oppositions to Leo, it's kind of like the rights of the individual versus the rights of the collective. And are these rights of the individual infringing upon the rights of the collective? And are they infringing upon divine right? Like, what would God want? Because sometimes, don't you ever ask yourself, why the heck would God let Trump win? But I can think of some answers, to be honest. And because I think that the secularization and the profanity and the secular culture has just gotten out of hand, and that some of that and that profanity actually does infringe upon the collective, the rights of the collective, which are, I don't need to have my eyes burned by looking at that. I don't need to have that information coming into my consciousness, or that dirty soul, those dirty, some of the things have just gotten a little out of hand. And I'm not sure that they're the best strata for young minds and for souls to grow up in. And so at some points, the rights of the individual that are so secular and profane, for them to brandish that profanity does begin to infringe upon the rights of the collective, or even divine right, God's right to like bring up a wholesome universe. And so there may be some questions about that. And it may be that's why Rudolf Steiner always said that the Aquarian age actually doesn't come in for a while. It's like 100 more years. And that may be because we have to take a couple steps back before we can step forward in order to purify some of this, the individual that are now holding responsibility to attend to divine right they need to learn how to do that again, right? Before it goes fully forward, is kind of what I think. But we also know that Uranus in Gemini corresponds not only to the American Revolutionary War, but also to the American Civil War and also to World War II. And in the United States has this signature of consistently bringing the United States into huge catastrophes with regard to war. And that Mars conjunct Gemini and Aquarius brought the dropping of the atomic bomb, and that we're of course having that again, and that that this period can be really volatile for the United States, and that it was both the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, and right now, and World War II, and right now we're kind of looking at all of that wrapped into one. It's like we're having a war with Europe, we're having a war with China and Russia for World War II, and we're having a war within the United States between the red and the blue. So it's quite a period. And unfortunately, the astrological signatures for this year are pretty threatening, and for the next few years. So Neptune's the planet of spirituality. It represents the crystalline sea, which is the space, as the primum mobile moves and the fire begins. So elements descend from fire to air to water to earth, right? So as the impulse of the procession or the fire begins to come in, it first goes through the fixed stars and gets its imprints from the zodiac and the fixed stars. But then it starts to cross the crystalline sea of Neptune, and then it goes into Saturn, right? So Saturn's the ring pass knot, where once it comes into Saturn, it starts to come into a body and into the world. It's the skin. Saturn's the skin and bones, and the impulse comes into embodiment. But Neptune is that crystalline sea that's in between. And so it's the spiritual waters of vision, imagination, spirituality, streams of consciousness, of sort of transcendent thought. I like this part. It confuses attempts to maintain strict boundaries, right? Like it goes past your boundaries. It's multivalent, and it has to do with imaginations and visions and spiritual musings. And we know that these things are really important in manifesting and what comes out on the other side, like what the Little Mermaid gets feet and steps out onto land, right? But we also know that mermaids can be very vicious and shadowy and ugly and violent as well. So this dream realm is affected by shadows and can be of like hope, fear, joy, pain, those dichotomies of emotions, and it can create aberrations in what comes out based on fear or hope, and so both hope and fear are suspect in the Buddhist. You don't want to shoot too high or too low. You kind of keep it even keel. So Neptune in Aries, however, it's been in Pisces forever, which is very oceanic and has had us really, our spirituality has been really in sort of the psychic and the more metaphysical realms for, while Neptune has been in Pisces. And I think it was like 2011 2011, 2012, when Neptune went into Aries. And you've seen like a huge increase in popularity of astrology, divination, I Ching, Enneagram, anything having to do with like sort of metaphysical, different ways of experiencing spirituality, have been made a huge resurgence and comeback with Neptune and Pisces. But also just in general, we've been feeling more compassionate, more dreamy, more, all of this sort of thing as, during this period. But the shift into Aries will be stark. That's a very different energy, and cardinal fire is aggressive. It's very dry. It's very individuated, and it's very aggressive and assertive, and it burns really hot. I do see this as like that transition as like the mist, like the evaporating mist, like this, which is like very spiritual, like as far as initiation, like being initiated by this mist of and baptized by fire, which is John the Baptist baptized by water, but Jesus baptized by fire, right? And this transformation of being baptized by fire and this spiritual mist of kind of water that happens. It's like an aerosol kind of thing. With Neptune in Aries, but religious sentiment in general will be more aggressive, bossy, leadership, headstrong, short, maybe even quick-tempered, short-sighted, impulsive, moving very fast, and passionate, and focused on what we think and our independent, fierce fight, kind of like that sort of. That's going to be very spiritual, coaching and competitiveness and that sort of thing, which reminds me of Jesus the Wolf, which is from the family. And if you don't know about that, I'm not going to go all into it, but Jesus the Wolf is like, they have their own Bible, and it's called the Jesus Bible. And Jesus is a real winner in that Bible. And that's why he likes certain characters that are powerful, but maybe not virtuous. Because, we want Jesus to have power, because Jesus with power creates a good world. A religious world. And so we'll see more of that coming in, and I can kind of see like, anyway, I'm not going to get all into it, but I can kind of see Dugin and Putin and those guys thriving in a world like that. And there's also, this idea of the creation of the next Rome, the next seat of Rome, being in the Eastern Orthodox Church. You can totally see that with Neptune and Aries. Aries is a brand new cardinal energy. Like move it to the new spot. Although the seat of Rome was once held in Russia with Ivan the Terrible and the Ivan the Terrible times. And if you're interested in that sort of thing and understanding religion from that perspective, and could you trust it, that sort of thing, I did a whole zine and a research paper on that time period, and it's on the channel. And the zine is free. I'll send it to you because my website's not up right now. So email me or leave a comment, and you're welcome to have a copy of that zine. It's pretty good, especially the beginning. Okay. And so notable periods with Neptune and Pisces include the American Civil War, Impressionism. Oh, that's a good one. And then the rise of Russia, and Peter the Great moved to St. Petersburg. Like, I don't know if you know that Peter the Great was like the most progressive czar of Russia. And he really wanted to make Russia, friends with other modern world powers, and to be recognized as an equal friend. Right. And maybe even great, who knows, but like greater. But I think he was really just looking to put Russia on the map as being the Russian culture is so intelligent. I mean, we're talking Dostoevsky here, and St. Petersburg is where the city he set up, and St. Petersburg ended up being a cultural epicenter that's called like the Silver Age of Russia with Madame Blavatsky and Gurdjieff and all of this, like at the time of 1917, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. But at that point, like by 1917, that St. Petersburg had rose to be a cultural epicenter, and the ballet and things like that were happening there, and esoteric studies were really flourishing. And so also we had Renaissance era ideological changes, including the early printing press. So Neptune and Aries, the spirituality of the individual, the self-efficacy of the individual to take charge of their own spirituality, and their own conversation with God. I can lead this. It's about me. I can talk to God, individual, that sort of thing. And the printing press. And then also the height of the Greek city-states, it said, but I thought that was weird because it says philosophical developments by Socrates, but the years 432 and 419. And so I just looked up, and Julian the Apostate, the Julian the Emperor, was year 361. So this was before that. And it was after that. And it was, 325 is like the big year for the Nicene Creed. So that's where we were. It was, well after that. And and the Neoplatonic academies closed in 529. So, 529 is actually really closer. Okay, so 529 was the closing of the Neoplatonic Academy. And so sort of like the death of Hypatia and murder of Hypatia and those sorts of things. So we have to think that Neptune and Aries, started to maybe create some problems related to that, as more than philosophical developments by Socrates. But so it's something related to Neoplatonism, but also it mentions the Jewish-Roman War, which if you are familiar with like this historical Jesus kind of, there's like some debates about what happened there. And the dating of the prophecies and things like that that they relied on that were that came up during the Jewish-Roman War, and that's in the work of this man called Francis Carlotta, I think, or I always think Carrot. But anyway, Santos Bonacci talks a lot about that, and so that was that Jewish-Roman War, was during that time period as well, which is kind of interesting. And then these are just some major dates that Neptune is going to make this year. Of course, we have Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which we're going to talk, there's a slide about, and I'll say a little bit more about it, but it'll be the dissolution of old structures and boundaries, of containment, baptism by fire in the mist. And then Neptune sextile Pluto, which will bring religious power plays. And then, that makes me a little nervous. And this part, especially with regard to Pluto and Aquarius, like relating to the deep state and surveillance and things like that. And then Neptune and Aries, like the belief that they have the divine right to kind of do that. So then Uranus sextile Neptune will bring spiritual awakenings and the birth of new religions. And so then again, it's difficult kind of to look at that and knowing what's actually going on in our world, in the world of religious studies, which hardly anyone talks about, and really no one wants me to talk about, but there's a lot going on with regard to that. And so it's sort of frightening. It's not encouraging, at least to me. But nonetheless, a sextile, we can use it positively in our own lives. So maybe we'll get on to talking about more about that throughout the year as we get closer to that. This is just an overview. But Saturn, I want to talk about Saturn because Saturn's really important this year. And in order to understand the astrology of Saturn, you have to understand where he's been. So Saturn represents, is Kronos, the archetype of Kronos, or Father Time. And also like the death card guy with the hook of the sigil kind of thing that will chop off your cord and end your life, right? Like in that cord. So Saturn represents old age, and he's the great malefic. He's cold and dry. So he is like the antithesis of Jupiter and what the things that encourage the growth of life. Saturn's the opposite of that. He shuts down life, makes things very cold and very dry, and you're hunkered up and freezing cold and withdrawn within. He is limitations, boundaries, obstacles, harshness, anxiety, endings, It represents skin and bones and like the containers of things. And so, it takes a lot of force of pressure in order to get something into a container, or also to make it solid, right? So Saturn reifies and makes things solid. So he creates restrictions on our life force. If Saturn's is coming in my fifth, which, oh great, and then it's coming to my Jupiter, oh great, so it will restrict my ability to be positive, it restrict my ability to be optimistic, and my fire to fight back and things like that. So it restricts the life force. Saturn on your sun, can restrict your vitality, things like that. People often lose a lot of weight when Saturn's on their sun, because it's restricting that life force. Also, it's doing what needs to be done, delayed gratification and that sort of thing. And Saturn enters Aries today, February 13th, where he's at fall. Just making sure. Oh yeah, I have enough time. Okay. And so Saturn enters Aries today, where he's at fall. And so that means that, Saturn doesn't have what he needs in order to be able to build structures, to regrow skin, and to build out into the world, or hold or contain things or support things. He doesn't have what he needs. He doesn't have like the elements and building blocks he needs to accomplish his job. And so, and he is in exile in Aries. So it's like he's opposite Libra, where he's in exaltation. So this is like the Badlands for Saturn. If Aries could choose any planet not to have come to its house, it would be Saturn. So Aries likes to shoot from the hip. It likes to go fast and hard. It likes to be, to incite action, like introduce things and spearhead things forward. That's a very Martian term there, but Aries is ruled by Mars, and it likes to go fast and burn hot and bright. But Saturn is very deliberate and slow, and likes to build things once and do the job right, and think about things for a long time, and be very measured and accurate and concretize. And so these two energies are at odds. And so Saturn is not in the best place. But also we know that, like I said, you need to know where Saturn's been in order to understand what this means, right? Because Saturn is like the Fool card. He's in the conjunction with Neptune is happening at 0 degrees Aries, the cardinal point that begins the Fool's step off that cliff, right? And so it's the beginning of a brand new baby Saturn. And so Saturn made conjunction to Pluto in 2020 and to Jupiter in 2020. So that, though, we saw the destruction of our world as we knew it happen in 2020. And that was predicted ahead of time. And many or most, I would say all astrologers knew what was happening and what was coming, right? And then we were like, see, we told you I'm not a Cassandra. I knew it. And the same thing with Saturn and Neptune about to make conjunction. The world is going to be body rocked here in a week. And it's going to be bigger. It's going to be newsworthy and bigger than anyone probably would believe who's watching this or listening to me today. Maybe not anyone, but actually probably not any of you guys, because if you're watching this, then you probably know. But, anyone else I would tell in my world. But Saturn and Jupiter coming together in December of 2020, that happens every 20 years, those conjunctions. But this one was much more rare because it was the beginning of a new Airy trigon. And, and so it was much more rare. And also it was a Christmas star, on the winter solstice. And so, we know that was more rare, and that's a much more rare transit. But Saturn conjunct Jupiter decimates the tent poles of reality. And so, because Jupiter is our world belief and our worldview, and it's like how we make meaning and our philosophy, and like, what is the, basic structure of meaning in the world, and how do we come about that? Like, our faith, our optimism. And Saturn is the whole cold, hard facts of reality, and like what actually shows up, and this sort of thing. And those two things crashed in 2020. So the temples of our reality or our worldview were decimated. It was like ground zero, taken down to ground zero. But that's been a slow crawl to ground zero, because we didn't believe it or know what was happening at the time fully, right? And it's only like as we got to Jupiter square Saturn, which was in 2024, that we began to see, oh yeah, that's institution, that system, that organization is not, those walls are not going to hold as they are. And so we started with Jupiter square Saturn, we started to see like the revisions of institutions start to happen. For instance, Naropa closed its doors and sold its building. They're going to go to an online model. And another like swanky college for privileged, sorry guys, but for privileged rich people that somebody over in Edinburgh was talking about, that was over near, you know, sort of that King Arthur legend kind of stuff. They had a college going in metaphysical studies and it closed as well. And so, you know, these things that weren't accessible to everyone and were really for the upper echelons of privilege, they just weren't relevant, like in this new Aries trigon with Pluto and Aquarius, where we're talking about, you know, networking the points of light of the collective, and more equitable access. And so, but Jupiter square Saturn for me started giving me that angle to see and appreciate Saturn, because if you and institutional history and what we could take with us from the old world, what do we want to keep in that hope chest? You know, I saw Saturn in Pisces as like a hope chest, and going through that hope chest of our memories and our nostalgia and things that we had kept and treasured in our visual imagination, like our, you know, those images and symbols that we hold on to. And that what do we want to put back in that hope chest? And there were a lot of conjunctions between Venus and Saturn in Pisces that were helping us to appreciate the Saturn there. So we, you know, there was that. And then, but 2026, we'll see Saturn go into Aries, where it's like the hot and dryness, of Aries just turns those brittle bones into dust. It's like things get so brittle, they crack. It's like the glass, you start to see the cracks in the glass and the cracks in the system. Well, Neptune will be there kind of creating a fog. So some people won't see those cracks. Did that. So some people won't see those cracks. They'll be trying to, you know, Saturnian kind of types and authority will be trying to cover those cracks a bit, and they'll do a good job. They'll spin sort of, Neptune represents media and disillusionment and kind of being Delulu. And they'll spend those sort of Delulu tactics in order to confuse and confound and obscure sort of the cracks that are happening for a while. But at the same time, that will be happening, you know. So Saturn moving into Aries, it's like the new youthful structures. But, you know, from my perspective, like in our own worlds, and a lot will be building. It's time to step off the chasm and start building out into the world, but it's fire, right? So it's coming in from the top. It's the highest element, right? And so we have to build this bridge out across that fire to get to an earth sign, right, of Taurus. And so we'll be building the bridge on the fly as we go. And so that was a key kind of term I came up with when Saturn was in Aries last summer, because we had a preview of this. And I noticed that in the Duffer Brothers kind of documentary about Stranger Things, that they actually, one of them, I don't know, actually used those words. We were building the bridge on the fly as we went. And I was like, oh my gosh, those were my keywords. Exactly. Saturn and Aries, right? So it'll feel like that, right? And so Saturn and Neptune are going to make conjunction on April 20th, shortly after the Losar eclipse that we're having on the 17th. And so, you know, it's like that transit is imminent at the time of the eclipse. And the keywords for Saturn and Neptune are the real versus the ideal, dissolving boundaries, structures collapsing, evaporating, aerosol, idealism clouding the reality of new institutions, baptism by fire, and the mist. And also it reminds me of that moment in Book of Life. I don't know if you guys have seen that movie, but in that movie, there's a bullfighter who's the younger generation, the new guard. And he keeps saying, killing the bull is wrong, killing the bull is wrong. And so he gets, it's really cute movie, but, and he gets disowned. It's not a Sanchez man. He can't even be a bullfighter. You're not even a Sanchez. You know, if you, with this newfangled killing the bull is wrong philosophy, but, you know, he goes out to this, you know, bullfight towards the end, and he's facing this massive bull. It's like all the bulls of the ages have combined into one, and they're this huge bull that's blazing on fire, and it's coming after him. And he's singing this song, Toro, I'm sorry, for tonight I understand. and he's saying that he's sorry, killing the bull was wrong. And if you can forgive and you can forget, love will truly live. And as he's singing this towards the end, the bull comes closer to them and kind of bows down, and it starts to dissolve and disintegrate into monarch butterflies, and the monarch butterflies fly away. And this reminds me a lot of the current moment that we're in, because I feel like we're in a shift between that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020 started to bring in the shift from postmodernism into metamodernism. And that at this moment in Saturn conjunct Neptune in Aries, it's just like that. If you can forget and you can forgive, then love can truly live. And the person that I'm saying that to, it's the bull, but it's like the postmodern is the one that needs to be saying that, because the metamodern now understands that killing the bull is wrong. Like the postmoderns, all they did was kill the bull. Like all they could do was complain and tear things down and say things were wrong and be, and use their intellect and idea, to combat against modernism, which we thank them greatly for, right? It's like I talked about in my zine, the fulfillment of the Shambhala prophecy came by way of the postmoderns, right? And this fulfillment moment, that it's been fulfilled. Those structures of modernism have been torn down. And they've been, and you hear things like about the conqueror mentality, like all these things that you wouldn't have thought at the beginning of this postmodern period would be commonly accepted now are commonly accepted. And widening the circle and all those things are very postmodern reflection of how modernism was wrong, right? And getting back to indigenous lands, indigenous owned lands and things like this. These are modernism was like killing the bull of the world, that the bull represents the earth, the Taurus field of the earth realm, and like the good of the garden that we have together. But postmodernism really killed that bull, and to the point of deconstructionism and Dorada. And I make this point that I make some points in the zine that you could read if you want about modernism and postmodernism. But nonetheless, at this moment, the metamodern is sitting there looking at this bull that's very angry and saying, if you can forget and you can forgive, love can truly live. And I really think that's a song to the postmodern. Like if you can forget and you can forgive, then and move on from tearing everything down and virtues, this like grievance theology and things like this. If we can forget and forgive, because we are not in that moment anymore. And so we don't, we need to shift our behavior in order into a more meta-modern stance. And we're going to have less enlightened people doing things that are going to eventually be prodding us in that direction. I mean, I have to ask myself, why did God let Trump win, right? And at a certain point, it's almost like because the rights of the individual then, whereas before the divine right had become corrupt and the rights of the individual were closer to what God wanted. Now the rights of the individual are becoming corrupt and pervasive, and they are conflicting with the wishes and rights of the collective and the wishes of God. So it's like the rights of the individual are now like in the postmodern, like Dorada, like where we're at. That's not divine right? Like we're no longer at the wishes of the divine through that. So now it's got to shift again. Okay. And so I really think that postmoderns in general need to, me too, but we need to take a step back and stop tearing everything down and coming at things with our brain and start coming at it more with our heart and seeking and also admitting where, okay, yeah, but that's too loud, or that's maybe I'm wrong, or this sort of thing. So, I think these two quotes are great. They're from Richard Tarnas, but because I think they're great because I think that we're experiencing both of these things, which is a heightened tension and dialectic between ideals and hopes and beliefs on the one hand and hard realities of life on the other. And also between religion and secular, or how about science and religion, and the belief of facts-based and faith versus reality-based, or red states and blue states. But main point here is that each perceive the other to be living in a state of delusional self-deception. And that's so true about us. Like, we want to send each other to re-education camps. We're saying you have Trump derangement syndrome, you need to go to re-education camp or this or that. Like, we consider the other team to be, point is that they see the other as completely delusional, and they've completely hook, line, and sinker on this whole other on their side. So a dichotomy between materialistic reductionism and imaginative vision on the other, which I think is personally interesting. But this is what I really feel is the subtle but pervasive darkening of the collective consciousness as a diffuse and difficult to diagnose social malaise, and at other times a direct response to deeply discouraging and tragic events. And it's like, yeah, we're between a rock and a hard place here, and it's depressing. And so there's a social malaise, like, of why bother, why try, I need to hide, or this or that, and the response to tragic events that are just really discouraging and scary. But Saturn-Neptune transits that are notable were the fall of the Berlin Wall, 1917, the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the fall of St. Petersburg, but also the founding of St. Petersburg, and also the American Revolutionary War. And so I would expect this Saturn and Neptune transit that's coming next week to have a show from Russia and the Alexander Dugin camp, and kind of starting to push forward with the collapse of the evil West and things like that, potentially coming in, which one faction of our government has us in a relationship with, which I know we don't like, but the other one is like going to be a fight against that. I don't know, but I can see that coming in with the Saturn Neptune conjunction next week. And we do know that that theoretically, at least according to Gary Blockman and the Rise of Holy Russia, that there is the push to reestablish the throne of orthodoxy in either Moscow or St. Petersburg or in Kyiv. And that this idea that it used to be there, with Ivan the Terrible, I don't know if I already said this, but I have an Ivan the Terrible zine that you can read about that time period when the throne of orthodoxy was held in Russia before. And if we could trust that, and I think I deduce no, we cannot, because they were still nation building, but rather than looking for the truth. But we know that the throne of Rome has moved around quite a bit. It was in Constantinople, it was in Italy, it's moved to different places. And so where will the throne of the papacy be, or the orthodoxy? And the idea, and if you watch these transits in the news, I've been seeing a lot of talk between the two sides of the papacy, along the lines of the transits, like things are coming up at the same and the right time. So Jupiter's the great benefic. Jupiter and Saturn, this is the new guard. So it's our new philosophy, new worldview that's going to be coming forward post 2020. And that Jupiter makes trine to Saturn this year. So I think we'll get on to starting to see some growth in that direction. Jupiter represents our optimism, our faith, our like expansive growth, warmth, hot housing. It's the perfect temperament to grow plants, warm and moist, right? It represents going high. It's how we make meaning and philosophy, like overarching meaning in life and things like that. Jupiter has been in Cancer and exaltation, so he's been really, really happy and doing a lot of good to hold families and people together. Mars came through Cancer and really cut and severed bonds, and had a retrograde in there, and you probably may have lost long lifetime friends that you considered family, and maybe even family. And so Mars really created some hard lines of separation between that. Jupiter in Cancer has been drawing us to the table with creating new bonds, new family bonds, like blessed be the ties that bind. But it's still very tribal, it's like Jupiter in Cancer will promote from within. It doesn't necessarily choose the best person for the job. It chooses who they know, and that sort of thing. So I'm sometimes suspect of Cancer because I have a lot of Aquarius, and I so like for that. But nonetheless, that Jupiter in Cancer has been a great benefit to us. and holding things together and holding people and bonds together and keeping us at the table with people in order to accomplish a bigger objective, letting some of the smaller things go. And also, but ultimately, it's been about expanding our capacity to care for ourselves and for others, and increasing our emotional capacity. And so I think, at least for me, it's been more focused on caring for others in the first parts of it, but Jupiter's going to turn direct in March. And I'm already kind of starting to feel this come in, that maybe we can't care for others if we don't take care of ourselves. And so maybe the second half, or at least if for me, who hasn't focused on it maybe enough, that, the second half of Jupiter in Cancer may have a lot to do with caring for ourselves, like self-care. And because we can't care for others unless we are healthy and can have enough water in our cup to share, right? And so, and I do think also with a lot of the self-focused energy that's coming in, that will also be reinforced by other planets. There'll be a beautiful Jupiter and Venus conjunction at 25 degrees Cancer, which will be like all the goods of the family on June 9th. So if you can schedule a family vacation for that time, or schedule a time to see your family during that time, there could be some really beautiful things that could happen on June 9th and in that time period. And then shortly after that, though, Mars is going to move into Gemini, and we'll talk about that later, but there'll be a bit of a flip of the script, or information being dropped that something changes. We get some new information and downloads, and then things get a little shaky then after that point. Jupiter moves into Leo, though, this year. And although it's not as exalted as it is in Cancer, so it won't have as great of a good as overall, it is in a really good place, right? Jupiter and Leo is very fiery and gives us self-confidence and fun, right? And just to roar and have fun and play our note and believe in ourselves and this sort of thing. I like that I wrote an inalienable right to party, because just we haven't had that much fun since 2020. There hasn't been that much opportunity for it. I mean, even music festivals that happen, I don't know, like with all the violence in the world and all the division and the pandemic and sickness and virus, all of it, it's just it all got ruined. I mean, nothing's even really hardly there anymore. And so there hasn't been very much opportunity for fun. Plus, we're scared and poor. We don't have food. We don't have luxuries. We don't have that we need, that aren't really luxuries. It's like, have enough food to have a party or this sort of thing. It's like resources have been scarce. And so there just hasn't been all that much fun happening, especially not wholesome fun out in the daylight that's just really exuberant. That sort of Coca-Cola and a smile feeling has been non-existent, basically. And so Jupiter and Leo might be really great for things like that. Unfortunately, Jupiter and Leo gets into, he's being aspected by a lot of planets that are going to tarnish or affect this energy and complicate it. But in 2026. And so Jupiter, pretty immediately makes opposition to Pluto. So there's this pull between, rights for self and rights for the collective, or, self and others, or this sort of thing. So there's this dichotomy and pull between that. And then that the Jupiter will make trine to Saturn, though, but, Saturn being in Aries and Jupiter and Leo, that's where I see this hot, like all this fire and self-aggrandizement, like kind of blowing up and inflating this hot air balloon that just gets so hot and high that it can just go up and lose sight of the ground. And then when we get to November 15th with this Jupiter plus Mars plus South Node transit, that balloon could pop and hit the ground. And that Jupiter's going to go retrograde in Leo at 27 degrees on December 12th. So just mostly saying, though, that, and, when Venus does her retrograde and makes square to Mars in Leo, and then in her retrograde, and she's going to be square to Leo, right? So, and then also square to Pluto. So there's there's a lot of energy, like hitting against the Leo energy, which is, why I gave the advice I gave in the beginning about potentially working with this Leo transit in order to kind of knowing from the beginning that we're going to be looking for holes in our self-confidence, and where we are faking it until we make it, and trying to come into a more authentic version of ourself that isn't faking anything, right? Like by clearing away those obstacles with the South Node in Leo. Mars is aggressive. It separates, it cuts, it's accidents, injuries. It's aggressive and assertive. Takes action, and takes action based on desire, right? And so Mars is a very martial and sign, and it's one of the malefic planets. Saturn's the great malefic, but Mars is definitely malefic. If you're looking for a transit that's going to kill, it's going to be Mars, right? It severs, it cuts away, it attacks, it creates distinction. And so Mars and Aries, so like different times when Mars is going to be pumped, right? So there was a Mars Sun conjunction in Capricorn in January, and also a conjunction to Pluto in January. And we saw some pretty disturbing events going on around that time related to authority taking action, and big brother, doing some things around that time in January. That's very martial. What's interesting is that if you scrolled through the astrology of last year, you would have noticed that Mercury and Mars were making conjunction quite a few times, especially during that Venus retrograde that happened last fall. And that's why, that's coming back. We're having that Venus retrograde in Scorpio again, this year. And that was hard, right? And Venus retrograde in Scorpio is really hard. And it's a Mars ruled sign, and she's going to make square to Mars. And then Mars is going to do a retrograde as well, right? And so but anyway, Mercury and Mars coming together can kind of put our mind and our words around an action plan. And so there's going to be a hit in March, and then Mars is going to conjunct Saturn, which could be a stopping point, and then another hit. But really, I think Mars conjunct Saturn is the activation of the Saturn in Aries, like the barking of orders, and like the bring the gate down, like because the army's advancing, draw the gate. I predict that we're going to be trapped in here in the United States. The bridge to Canada will be closed. They've got a wall going to Mexico, kind of thing. So I've always thought that's why I didn't want to build a wall, because it can trap you in. Anyway, but whatever, my politics, nobody agrees with me. So Mars conjunct Mercury conjunct Mars will bring fighting words, but it will also bring action plan, in our course of action, like vocalizing that and giving it words and putting it out there in the world. So those, you can look back at and I have it listed on one of these slides you can see later, of where all the Mars Mercury transits are, though, because they're connected. So you could connect the events of your life. Mars will square Jupiter and square Pluto, and it's the big deal that'll be, I suppose, from Taurus. Mars and Taurus will square Pluto. But I'm not we can get onto these things later. This is way too long. But Mars conjunct Uranus and Gemini is a big deal. So when Mars makes ingress into Gemini, it's noticeable. All the planets sort of go whoa, and things shift. And Mars conjunct Uranus could be very violent and explosive and shocking. The atomic bomb was dropped on a Mars conjunct Uranus transit. I don't predict that we're that close, but I do predict that, like along the lines of Lama Sultram's dragon year prophecy, that Mars and that Uranus and Gemini typically brings war, and world war, and atomic energy. And so Lama Sultram wasn't talking about astrology when she said that was based on an old Tibetan prophecy. But we as astrologers also know that Mars conjunct Uranus and Gemini brings that sort of threat. And so, but there will be chaos in the wires of communication and commerce, honestly. Gemini is about commerce too. So that can bring some interest. It's on July 3rd as well. Mars and Leo will oppose Pluto in Aquarius, which is what turns Venus retrograde. So when Mars makes in Leo, comes into Leo, I'm going to pump myself up, and then makes opposition to Pluto in Aquarius. turns Venus retrograde, and she actually moves back to go and make a square to him. So that's interesting. And Mars and Jupiter in the South Node, that's what just any astrologer scrolling through the year kind of drops their jaw when they see that. And that's what is like, be very careful about the fire horse year with regard to playing it overconfident, right? Mars in Leo starts getting crazy in October. So be careful. Venus is the planet of love, beauty, the things that we think are beautiful and want and are attracted to, desires and our adornments and vanities and things that we just find beautiful, right? And so, and that Venus, Venus is, of course, fast moving planet. She's going to have a lot of different formations. Anytime Venus is in conjunction with Mars or the sun is a big deal, though. And that also happened in January around the time of the big upsets that happened in Capricorn. She'll be in exaltation in Pisces, which is really nice. And that Venus and Jupiter conjunction in Cancer will be really nice. But when she's in Scorpio, that's going to be rough. So Venus in Scorpio is at fall, and it's just like the beauty of blood and trauma and ugly wounding and, and that sort of thing. Which there is an aesthetic that's very macabre and sort of emo and dark, which can be very beautiful. Like Wednesday on that show of the Addams Family or whatever, she's very Venus and Scorpio vibed. But ultimately, it is about the beauty of our trauma and our wounds. And sometimes we do like to kind of poke those wounds and cry, right? That's why there are certain songs that we put on that make us cry more and stuff like that sort of sulking in the energy. But really, it's to try to clear it up and try to access those things and draw what we need to it. But Venus in Scorpio is also very secretive, and this is a very internal process. But, when she is in Scorpio, like I said, she'll make square to Mars, but she is going to go back into Libra, into the sign of her domicile, which has some hope to it because Libra is kind of where things really started falling apart with regard to disharmony in relationships and imbalance, and certain people who were the heavy just running off like they now had the crown and forget everybody else. And though, like in shocking ways. So one thing that happened was the Israel-Palestine conflict, but there are others. And so just that shocking injustice, right? And imbalance in the relationship between those two parties. And so maybe there can be some restitution of balance and restoration in that way that could come in with Venus retrograde. And making into Libra, right? And then going back forward. It's like she's really looking for that. And we are looking for that in our relationships, though we may not be able to. I'm not sure what we could do for the Palestinians at this point. But as far as in our own relationships, when things broke down in disharmony and we've maybe been getting bludgeoned by the short end of the stick in very unjust situations since then potentially there could be some restoration around that. And it reminds me of the story of Hathor's Skemet, especially this year with this energy. And Skemet was a lion that the Egyptian gods sent down to, much like the story of Noah, where the bad humans were flooded out. Skemet ate them. And so these people were desiring the wrong things, kind of like we talked about in the beginning with the fire, like clarifying your desire for higher things instead of lower. Well, these people were desiring the lower things. So they sent Skemet, who was a lion, down, and she got really bloodthirsty and she ate all of them, but they couldn't get her to stop. So they rained down beer and she drank the beer and she turned into Hathor, the goddess of love, who's a cow head, and both of these are on the fixed cross. So kind of interesting. And Venus is ruled, like the Taurus is ruled by Venus, but Skemet is a lion and a sun goddess. So that's interesting. But anyway, there's those two sides. So the higher and the lower of what we love. But kind of along those lines, I put the karma's going to track you down step by step and town to town, Taylor Swift, regarding to those inharmonies or imbalances in justice and relationships that came in 2023. But here's a list of Venus transits. I'm not going to go through them. Mercury, same. Mercury makes a ton of transits, but the notable things to notice about Mercury, which relates to our communications, our commerce, messaging, books, writing, learning, this sort of thing, broadcasting. You can read these things. You can pause it and read some of these things. But Mercury, which is the power of communication and learning, and connections, making connections like that. That he has had he'll have 5 conjunctions with Mars, 2 left to come. He's already had 3 of them, and so those are listed there. You can look at. But what's interesting about Mercury this year is that he does his retrograde in water signs, which can be really nice because we don't have a lot of water energy or earth energy. But we do have Jupiter in Cancer in the beginning. But other than that, we have a lot of air and fire, and so water retrogrades can be really nice, wrapping our mind around things that are happening by considering how we feel about them and connecting to our emotional sensitivities in the waters can be really nice with all this fire that is so individuated and not connected. It's hot, it's dry, not moist, right? So water's moist, right? And so it's also inward and reflective. It's a yin energy where there's so much yang this year. And so there'll be 3 Mercury retrogrades in Pisces, all 3 kicked off by a major transit that then Mercury's like, oh my gosh, I got to go think about that. So Saturn enters Aries, Mercury goes retrograde. Mars enters Gemini, Mercury goes retrograde. Venus in Scorpio, Cazimi in the retrogrades, Cazimi with the sun in Scorpio, Mercury goes retrograde, right? So those 3 things. And major transits happening in Gemini are Uranus entering Gemini. It's a big deal. And Mars conjunct Uranus in Gemini, which we talked about a little bit. But major transit in Virgo will be that Mars retrograde in Virgo. And so that'll be, that's again about how do we make it real versus not fake it till we make it. We want to make it real and tangible and to grow forward on the earth so that we can offer whatever it is that we're growing to people and friends, and like share it and divide the spoils, separate the good from the bad and give out the good, this sort of thing. So eclipses that are interesting. It's just I'm not going to say a whole ton about it. I will say that the nodes are moving, and so the nodes have been in Pisces and Virgo, and they're going to move into Leo and Aquarius. So the North Node represents the out breath or the receiving and grace. And it's like what's incoming into our life and new developments. And so the North Node's been in Pisces. So we've been receiving new spiritual visions, new dreams and imaginal visions and things like this. And letting go of things that are Virgoan, which are the devil in the details, drilling down so far in the details, because you'll always find something that's against you, this doesn't add up. Let's wait, that sort of thing. It's not perfect yet. It's like letting go of things needing to be perfect, and they're good enough, right? And Pisces is very much about good enough. Like it blurs distinction and has like that watercolor details and things. And so it'll blur and think that's beautiful, right? And Virgo is very precise and measured and things like that. So, but that'll be switching into Aquarius and Leo. So the North Node will be bringing, and it'll also switch houses in our charts, right? And so the North Node will be bringing in new brilliant ideas, networks, and new connections and neural connections, and letting go of pride and inferiority complexes. I'm going to talk just a half a minute about this eclipse that's coming in on February 17th, just before Saturn Pluto, this Losar eclipse, right? And it's at 28 degrees Aquarius. It's North Node eclipse, so it's going to be bringing in, but it's the first in the series of these Aquarius eclipses. The nodes are technically still in Pisces and Virgo, but the formation's happening in Aquarius, so it's the beginning of this new storyline. So eclipses bring beginnings and endings, and the rise and fall of new things. And so there's one storyline going on in the Virgo Pisces axis of our chart, but this new story is starting with regard to the Leo Aquarius axis of our chart. And that starts at this Losar moment of this brand new beginning. And it's ruled by Saturn, so it's not in the greatest, doesn't have all the elements and fodder that it needs. But at the same time, and Venus is conjunct the North Node in Pisces. Venus is an exaltation in Pisces, which is really beautiful, and conjunct the North Node. It's a bit much, though. And I can see this, and for a lot of people, being an upswing of idealism and separating into camps of whatever Neptune and Aries camp they're in, and the right to, and they'll like an upswing of irrational belief, like it really tap into irrational belief and kind of start to get, like the upswing of nonprofit idealism, where you like just like, I'm in it just because it feels so good and I want to do that, and then eventually that wears off, right? But this eclipse will bring that sort of impulse and people to kind of swing off, and it really does matter. So we need to kind of guard against that. But the other thing I think is really interesting is that the total South Node solar eclipse at 20 degrees Leo, on August 12th, 20 degrees Leo is where Mars is going to retrograde back to. So Mars goes retrograde in Virgo all the way back to 20 degrees Leo. So this is again saying that, like, that overzealous self-confidence that's just so burning so hot, it really starts to get checked. And August 12th, will be a moment where that eclipse imprint comes in, and South Node is going to be asking you to let go of pride, but also inferiority complexes. So that's why I just think the wisest way to ride the fire horse is to ride more slow and steady until we get to that August 12th eclipse. And that really what we're looking for in the beginning part is places and things that are blocking us from confidence and are blocking our shine, and thinking about how we can let go of that and transform that, as we start to move into August 12th with the eclipse, South Node eclipse, but also largely as Jupiter come and Mars activating it come to the South Node, and that out, trash can that goes out of the cosmos and taking it out of our etheric body, as I mentioned, that I sometimes talk about that. It's taking it out of our code of our etheric body, or our actual plant, not just our astrality and our feelings and our triggers, but out of our etheric body. There are things being taken out of that. And so one of these would be pride, and ways, or inferiority complexes, things that block our ways we're not doing Leo to its highest tone, right? And so very interesting that Mars will go back to that degree and then go forward again, and that is in 2027. So kind of ends this year, things that it's not like it's a beginning, brand new beginnings happening this year. This is not a culmination year, and it definitely ends on a cliffhanger. So that's the end of what I have to share with you today. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of the channel, and happy year of the fire horse. I hope there are many blessings to all of us, and that we learn to really clarify the fires of our desire towards that which is of the higher love, and with non-attachment though, and to run towards more connections, and ways to ignite and spark joy and fun and wholesome creativity and sharing, and the courage to share our heart truth in this fire year. Okay, love you guys. Bye.